Even allegedly moderate, reasonable Republican politicians are folding like tissue paper in the face of Donald Trump's repeated public claims that if he becomes president again, he intends to weaponize his future Department of Justice against his political opponents, going so far as to say that he will tell his future Attorney General to make up a reason to prosecute his political enemies. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, so I actually didn't intend to cover this video. I was doing research for a separate video, and I came across this clip involving an allegedly moderate, reasonable Republican who I repeatedly pick on because she is neither of those things. And it concerns Donald Trump's recent remarks at a South Dakota rally, which we covered again in a recent video, in which he's publicly said, listen, if he becomes president again, he intends to weaponize his future Department of Justice to go after his political opponents. So we're going to play this clip, and I want you to see how this allegedly rational, reasonable, moderate Republican addresses her party leader saying such ridiculous, dangerous, fascist things.
I win, and somebody wants to run against me. I call my Attorney General. I say, listen, indict him. Well, he hasn't done anything wrong that we know of. I don't know. Indict him on income tax evasion. You'll figure it out.
That's what he was saying he would do if he wins a second term. I mean, but isn't that the definition of weaponization of federal government?
I can't tell by the tone if he's joking or if he's serious.
That right there is ridiculous. That's Nancy Mace, the Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, saying, listen, I can't tell if he's joking or not. Imagine a world in which President Barack Obama, President Joe Biden, President Bill Clinton, a Democratic president or former Democratic president running for re-election, were to ever say such a thing. Imagine how this Republican congresswoman or any Republican congresswoman, or for that matter, any Democrat, would react to a Democratic president saying that, even jokingly. She is grading the GOP on a curve dishonestly, and she's making concessions for them that she would never allow if the shoe were on the other foot.
But
isn't that the whole Trump? I mean, that's what everyone said about Trump every year.
I don't know. So, but I will say that setting the precedent of arresting your number one political enemy is a poor precedent to set. We don't want any president, current or future, to say, well, someone did it to me, they arrested me when I was running for president, I'm going to do the same to them.
See how she deflects? She's like, listen, Donald Trump's remarks, his public admissions that he will pursue vengeance, his declaration that he intends to have his attorney general just make up a predicate to go after his political opponents, that doesn't matter. The real issue is actually indicting or prosecuting criminals. See, if you do that, if there's a politician who has committed crimes or you have sufficient evidence to indicate that they have committed crimes, if you prosecute them, well, then that justifies them saying that they can target you for illegitimate reasons. If you come after me for legitimate reasons, I am justified in saying I will manufacture illegitimate reasons to go after you. This is, again, ridiculous, and she would flatly, categorically reject that logic if it were ever coming from a Democrat.
We don't want the tit for tat. All evidence, all due process should follow the facts rather than guide, an indictment or an arrest prematurely. I wish that they had waited. I think several of the indictments aren't really worth the paper that they're printed on. And I wish that they had waited until after the presidential primary, because we don't want to set that kind of precedent in the future now or in the future at all.
See, again, the timeline is arbitrary. They should have waited to prosecute Trump until after the presidential primary. Why? And furthermore, even if we grant you that premise, which we don't have to, because justice, the justice and the prosecution of justice shouldn't fall on your arbitrary political time frame. Even if we did do that, what would stop you from making the same comment now after the presidential primary? We would just take it on faith, I assume, that after the presidential primary, if the DOJ chose to prosecute Trump, you wouldn't be saying the same thing. Oh, this is an outrage. This is a miscarriage of justice. We have no basis for that. Nancy Mace and other Republicans want to give Donald Trump a get-out-of-jail-free card. He was a former president, so we can't prosecute him. He was president at one point. When he was president, you can't prosecute him then either. He's running for president. Now he may be a future president. You can't prosecute him. They want like an all-timeline get-out-of-jail-free card for Donald Trump, which, again, they would never allow for any Democrat politician.
Somebody else has power to do that.
I mean, you can't just get a subpoena and have this
You can
indictment.
still
It's not
run
like
for
it's President
president.
Biden doing it. I mean, there's evidence that these prosecutors have used to get subpoenas to have these indictments that are,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it'll be decided in a court of law, but it's not like there's no basis. He's saying he could just manufacture whatever against someone who's running against him and have his attorney general pursue it.
Right there. So Caitlin Collins is pointing out, whatever you feel about those indictments, Nancy Mace says that they're not worth the paper they're printed on. They had to pursue, the indictments had to have a predicate. There had to be subpoenas issued that satisfied a judge. The evidence was presented to a grand jury of citizens, and in every case, they recommended proceeding with charges against Donald Trump. So it wasn't arbitrary by any stretch of the imagination. But now, listen to what Nancy Mace has to say about the court of law versus the court of public opinion.
Is that appropriate?
It'll be decided in a court of law, but it also
But is it
decided.
appropriate for the Republican frontrunner, the party of law and order, to say, hey, I'm going to make up these charges about someone who's running against me if I am in president again?
It'll also be decided in the court of public opinion. It'll be decided at the ballot in the Republican primary, whether or not people think you should run for president, for example. All of that, the public gets to decide when they go into the ballot box and they press a lever to vote for president.
But what's your opinion on his comment there?
I can't tell if he's joking or if he's serious. Like, sometimes it's a joke, sometimes he's serious. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him about it directly, so I don't know the tone with which he was going forth. I don't know.
So cowardly. And actually, what Caitlin Collins, and this is my constant complaint to the press, good for Caitlin Collins for pressing the issue, but people like Caitlin Collins and Jake Tapper and others should always offer the counterfactual. Get the Republican on the record. Be like, okay, you say you can't comment on it. You don't know if they're joking. You don't want to say. So let me present you with the counterfactual. Let's say President Biden comes out tomorrow and jokes about prosecuting his political enemies or says something about prosecuting his political enemies. Are you going to be this generous and circumspect with the president's words? Are you going to say, well, we can't criticize President Biden because he might have been joking? Would you say that? Push them. Get them on the record. Have them put the shoe on the other foot. Of course, they could lie, but at least you'll have it on the record. You will put it in their minds. You're going to ask them, okay, you say this now when it's your guy, but what if it's not your guy? Would you say the same thing? Would you be consistent in your principles? And then we'll have it on the record in case something like that were to ever happen, and we can say, see, you said this thing here, and now the shoe's on the other foot, so can we expect you to be consistent? But again, she won't answer the question. She won't say whether or not it's appropriate for the leader of the party of law and order to say that he will prosecute, he will manufacture a predicate by which to prosecute and punish and revenge himself upon his political opponents. It's really disgusting. But this is how far the GOP has fallen. It's an authoritarian cult of personality in which even the sane, moderate, rational Republicans have forfeited all their credibility to this deranged lunatic.